Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. And today's book is quite unusual, the one that I want to talk about, because of the excess mentions of violence. Lord Jesus, this book is quite violent. It is about, violence, of course, and it's set in the American West during the 1800s. I am referring to Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West, an excellent sort of subtitle, by Cormac McCarthy, which was published in 1985. For those who don't know, and I have a feeling Cormac McCarthy is one of those more well-known American authors in the latter half of the 1900s and in present day. But for those who don't know, Cormac McCarthy is an American writer known for writing westerns and apocalyptic fiction. He's written Blood Meridian, The Road, which was turned into a movie. He's written All the Pretty Horses, as well as a number of other romantic westerns, whereas Blood Meridian is a revisionist western, different genre or subgenres of western. He's written a number of other works as well, as I think they're No Country for Old Men or There Will Be Blood. I always get those two confused, but he wrote the book for it, and interestingly, that wasn't as well received as some of his other work. But he's kind of known for writing about nihilism and morality and things of those nature. A lot of people have talked about his writing style, where he doesn't use a lot of punctuation and he writes a lot of run-on sentences. And I noticed that a little bit here, but I also realized I've been reading a lot of books lately that have that style, and so it didn't really seem out of place to me. Although Lucas from the Bits of Lit, who actually recommended that I read this, made some comments on it, which I didn't really see too much about in here, but I guess, if that's the type of literature you're already reading, you're not really likely to notice it. But it was obvious at some points that he has a very specific writing style that I'll talk more about later. But I really think his writing style helped accentuate that word, what he was trying to say in this book. And spoiler alert, I will definitely recommend it, and I'll talk a little bit more about why I recommend it later. But it was extremely violent and probably like one of the more intense books that I've ever read, and one of the saddest books that I've ever read as well. But I do want to seek out more of Cormac McCarthy's work, just because of his fantastic writing style. And, the ideas that he's writing about, I want to see if they carry over into his other works, which maybe they will, maybe they won't. I'm gonna be exploring them as I proceed forward. So without further ado, let's talk about Blood Meridian. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Blood Meridian focuses on a young teenage runaway named The Kid. We don't find out his real name throughout the story. He's ran away from Tennessee to Texas, where he runs into a man named Judge Holden, who is in Nacogdoches at the start of the story. Judge Holden, we meet him, and we basically start the story by him accusing a preacher of various crimes, including molesting young women. And after a mob forms and chases the preacher around town and out of town, I think, Holden realizes that it was all made up, that he lied just for the fun of it, which gives you great insight into his character as it proceeds forward. A lot of violence happens in Nacogdoches, so the kid leaves and begins wandering about from place to place, starting fights and trying to survive in various ways. He eventually draws the attention of a rogue army unit who tries to recruit him because they want to go down to Mexico and prolong the war that's going on down there, because this takes place around 1850, in an effort to gain some land down in Mexico to raise their station in life. The kid eventually joins the military unit, but it's funny because they are immediately attacked when they get to Mexico by a group of Apaches who kill most of the unit. Although the kid and some of his fellow soldiers survive. And they eventually make their way to a town where they're imprisoned. Judge Holden comes upon the scene again with a group of militiamen. They are essentially paid scalpers who are trying to protect both the Mexican villagers and the American people from Apache or native attacks. And so they're paid to gather scalps in that way. And the kid and some of his fellow soldiers make an argument that they're worth bringing on in an effort to do this. And the judge agrees to take them on. And thus begins a series of violent acts, both against the Apaches, the natives of the area, against the Mexican villagers, against Americans, and against the people who are on Holden's team, among the Glanton gang, as it's called. They are willing to kill and harm anyone to get resources, to get money, to have people stop bothering them or annoying them, any number of reasons. And it's through their journeys and their various bits of violence that we learn about the gang, especially about Judge Holden. We learned that the entire gang has had a contact with Judge Holden. He's very mysterious, but he seems to be present in their lives. They view him with awe as he talks about stories and talks about how he answers to war, and he sees death as important, and there is no sense of morality to him. He's just morality is meant to keep the powerful down and beholden to the powerless. And he's willing to do a whole bunch of horrible things because his worldview permits it. A bunch of violence happens, which I don't need to name here, but they attack an Apache village and kill the women and children too. They attack a bunch of villagers. The kid is separated from the group, but later rejoins. They eventually make their way to Yuma, where they set up a sort of ferry boat system where they actually rob passengers, even though they're supposed to be protecting them. And eventually the Yuma natives attack, and they manage to kill Glanton, sort of the leader of the group. It seems it's a form of comeuppance for him. And the judge and the kid flee into the desert. Eventually, the kid decides to try to kill the judge because of how he's bringing about all of this destruction and doom around them. But the judge manages to flee, and they are separated for a great period of time. The kid's eventually thrown into prison, but then released, but not before the judge gloats about how he's going to pin all of this on the kid. And the kid begins wandering about for years. Several years pass, in fact, where the kid just witnesses a whole bunch of death in the American West. And eventually, in the 1870s, he makes his way to a bar in Texas, where he encounters the judge, and the judge begins talking about destiny and how the kid was brought to the dance, essentially this bar, in an effort to see who is the best dancer of sorts, either the judge or the kid. And the kid asserts that he doesn't really want to kill the judge, and he doesn't believe the judge is anything, and he doesn't need to do any of this, but the judge disagrees. Eventually, the kid goes to the outhouse, where he finds the judge there naked, and it's implied that the judge rapes the kid. Does he kill the kid? We never actually find out. But as the story ends, the narrator notes that the judge is dancing, kind of in a very creepy and unsettling way, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, Cormac McCarthy provides us with quite a bit to think about in this story. I won't have time to talk about all of it, especially the aspect of violence in the story, because you could write treatises on it, on how he views violence, and you can also write extensive papers on the judge character in this story. And I don't mean to do that here. We'd be here for hours talking about that, but I will mention a couple of the ideas that he talks about as it pertains to violence. Cormac McCarthy depicts a vision of the West where violence is the answer. It's also the question being violence, and the answer is yeah, violence is pretty good. Let's do the violence. Violence seems to be the answer of everything. It's how you solve all your problems. You can talk, but talking might not get you very much. The answer is to just shoot the person dead, shoot somebody dead. If you kill them, they're out of your way and you don't have to deal with them ever, ever again. In this way, it's kind of true to a realistic depiction of the West, given that there was so much violence towards natives, towards the Mexican people who lived there at the time, to everyone. All parties did violence towards one another, and Cormac McCarthy shows that in this story, how it wasn't just the white people doing violence, everyone was kind of doing violence. It was a part of everyday life, and there's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you here. With darkness, one soul rose wondrously from among the new slain dead, and stole away in the moonlight. The ground where he'd lain was soaked with blood, and with urine from the voided bladders of the animals, and he went forth stained and stinking, like some reeking issue of the incarnate dam of war herself. And I just find that interesting quote. Like, it takes place after the kid's unit is attacked by Apache Indians at the beginning of the story. And he just gets up, sees the violence around him, and proceeds forward. And that kind of underlies a lot of what's happening in this story. All of these characters witnessing violent acts happening, maybe being a little bit alarmed, but not enough to show anything. The word of the day here is unfazed. A lot of these characters don't seem to react to all this violence happening around them because it is so commonplace, which is a terrifying reality. Violence has become so normalized in this vision of the Old West that it's kind of nothing. It's a nothing thing for anybody. It's just something you have to learn to deal with. And maybe one day you'll be killed in cold blood for some reason. And that's just something that you're going to have to deal with. This violence is non-discriminating. It happens towards the natives. It happens to the locals, as I said, and it happens to the partners. The kid, shoots some people who are near to him. Glanton kills some people who are traveling with him. The judge doesn't really give a hoot about who he kills. He's willing to kill anyone, especially if they're annoying to him. And sure, some of the members of the gang do get upset that this is happening, but they don't do anything about it. Like, it's not enough. Maybe because they know if they act out, if they try something, violence might be done against them. And so the question I have about all of this, and the question that you should pose whenever there's a whole bunch of violence happening in a piece of media, is what is the purpose of this violence? Is this violence just for the sake of violence? Which I talk about somewhat on this channel with the Mask Omnibus, which I shouldn't compare the two because they're not even close to being equal. But like the Mask had violence for the sake of violence, no commentary on it. Is that what's happening here? I would have to say I disagree. I think there's a message to this violence. Cormac is trying to show a realistic depiction of the Old West. Rather than it being noble or heroic, he's like, look at this. This is a violent mess. This is our heritage, and we have to see it for what it is. We have to see who came before us and who we still might be. He's also trying to illustrate the darkness that lies within humanity. He might have made up some of the stuff in this story or all of the stuff in this story, but it's based on real events that happened. And we have to reckon with that in some sort of way. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this again. And the answer, said the judge, if God meant to interfere in the degeneracy of mankind, would he not have done so by now? Wolves call themselves man. What other creature could? And is the race of man not more predacious yet? And I find that very, very interesting quote from the judge, and a series of very interesting quotes from the judge, essentially saying that if God had intended for humanity to behave any other way, wouldn't he intervene and do something there? And the fact that God doesn't intervene means he somewhat approves of all this violence happening, that this is God-sanctioned violence happening in the Old West. Although that would suggest that humanity is prone to this violence and it's always going to be happening. But you could argue that, what's happening back east a ways? Violence isn't happening constantly in New York City at this time, although maybe it kind of is, but it certainly isn't happening now. What makes the Old West different? What makes the humans in the Old West different? I don't think it's necessarily part of the human heritage. And I disagree with the judge in a lot of ways because of that. I see the point. I just don't necessarily agree with it. And if you think that this violence is inherent in humanity, let me know in the comments below. Let's have a discussion about that. And another thing I want to talk about here is the judge. The judge is a very fascinating character. I thought at first that McCarthy was just going to ignore the judge, like he was going to present him here and then move on without ever bringing him back. But I am interested, or I do like that he did bring him back and focus so much on him, because he really got to explore the ideas of morality and evil, like the idea of evil within the judge. The judge, for his part, he's a mysterious and very violent person. He drowns puppies in the story, which is kind of funny. He kills various people, shoots them in the back, shoots them in the front, kills them here, kills them there, kills them anywhere, scalps a young child, and just lets the Glanton gang do as they do, and even pushes them to do it in some cases. I would also say that he's long-winded. He does go on several rants where he's like, oh, morality, is fake. Don't believe in it, and goes on about how humans are inherently evil and that society belongs to the powerful and the most violent. And maybe McCarthy's trying to make a point there, but it comes off as the judge is long-winded. He's an evil man trying to justify his evil actions. It's very convenient for him that the world is the way he describes, because that allows him to live the life that he wants to live. Like, if the world were any other way, which he probably wouldn't accept, he wouldn't be allowed to commit violence wantonly or anything like that. So I think he comes off a bit long-winded, a bit of an asshole who's trying to justify his horrible views by convincing these illiterate Westerners that what he's doing is okay. And some of them are odd, but some of them see through his BS. Like the kid, also the priest in the story, it comes into conflict with him. And as I mentioned before, he believes his violence is God approved. That if it wasn't, God would have stepped in and done something by now. And the fact that he doesn't just makes man master of the domain for the land. And he also argues against morality, as I pointed out before, saying that morality is a lie and it's meant to keep down the powerful. Allow me to read you another interesting quote from this. "Might does not make right," said Irving. "The man that wins in some combat is not vindicated morally. Moral law is an invention of mankind for the disenfranchisement of the powerful in favor of the weak. Historical law subverts it at every turn. A moral view can never be proven right or wrong by any ultimate test." And this gets at what I was talking about before. Like if you believe that society is, or that there is no such thing as morality, or that it's subjective and that you can bend it to your way however you want, you can get away with a lot of the violence that the judge does and believe that you're in the right. Because there's no morality, because society is ultimately determined by who is the strongest and who is the most violent. You don't have to subscribe to the idea of good or evil. And the weird thing is he's somewhat proven right by McCarthy in this story, because ultimately the kid tracks down the judge. Like, surely he must have heard that the judge was there at this bar, and he tracked him down, and the judge says, oh, you're here for the dance. You're here to test our might and see who is the most violent, the most powerful. And the kid says he's not, but he's in the presence of the judge who said at one point in the story that anything that exists in the world without his knowledge anything that exists at all has to exist with his consent. Like he's free to kill or let live anything that he wants. And so the kid being in the judge's presence is only going to agitate him even further. He knows this. He's been around the judge for quite some time. So he must be here to do this fight. And ultimately the judge proves himself right, that he is the strongest, because presumably the kid dies. The judge rapes and then murders him in the outhouse. At least that's how I see it happening in the story. And he proves that he was, the most powerful. He proves that his way of viewing the world is somewhat correct, even if it is morally flawed. And even morals don't matter at that point, I think. Even though I think he's a terrible person, he does kind of show that the most powerful ultimately gets gets the most prizes or something like that. I think you can also make an argument in this story that the God is God, or not God, the judge is God, or the judge is the devil, or even just a regular demon, a warlike, godlike figure. Especially at the end of the story, where it's like the judge dances, where that's just repeated in a manner that suggests the supernatural or something like that. Especially because the way his flesh is like horribly horrifying or something like that, as he's attempting to rape the kid. I think you can make an argument. It does seem weird that McCarthy would go the whole story staked in realism and then dig into the supernatural, but it's given everything we know about the judge and how he comes into conflict with the priest in this story. It does seem like he might be sort of a devil-like figure, Lucifer, coming to prove that humanity is as terrible as he thought they would be. A number of other great things about this story. One thing in particular is Cormac McCarthy's writing, specifically the scenic writing that takes place in the story. Like, the writing is phenomenal, but how he describes the setting, sort of a blood-filled sky in this bloody landscape, but it also depicts a dead or dying land. It kind of depicts a hell in which everyone exists. It's inhospitable to the people within it. They have to fight for any and all resources, including water, and nobody's having a good time while traveling through it, except for the judge maybe, but we've already seen that he's a complete monster, so of course he's going to have a great time here. And I think it really adds to the overall message of the story, like that in this, what kind of person could survive in this inhospitable land? A complete monster of a person. People, like, nobody really, like, they're all dying, they're all suffering. You see the bones of dead animals, the remains of people from long ago. It's a very bad time, and like, this is some really excellent writing by McCarthy, and I can see why he's been held in such high esteem by critics and other readers alike. I do have a few problems with this book. It is overly nihilistic. Anyone who subscribes to this, can believe that you can get away with anything because there's ultimately no meaning in anything. And I feel like it's a weird message to have there. And not necessarily that Cormac McCarthy believes it or anything. And I do think it's the point of the story that it looks so bleak. So maybe it's just me having a problem with the uncomfortableness of the story, which is what Cormac McCarthy wants you to feel. He wants you to feel unsettled and uncomfortable by all this violence happening. And then there's also a vague plot. Like, it's just a characters going from one point to another, doing more violence along the way without any real meaning. And I know that sort of meandering violence is part of the story, but it would have helped to have a little plot there to keep the characters with a sense of purpose rather than just doing violence. But again, that I think if you added any plot there, it might distract from what Cormac McCarthy's trying to do. So I can understand, but I do think that a plot could have helped the story in some way. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. A really, really, really good story. One that I'm going to recommend, and one that I also thank Lucas from the Bits of Lit for recommending to me. He was talking about it as he was reading it, and I really, I got the sense that it was violent, but I didn't know it was this violent, where violence happens like every couple pages, and extreme violence, sort of like you're enmeshed in it, and it doesn't really ever stop being harrowing to read, which is you think you'd get desensitized to it, but Cormac McCarthy keeps making it seem as heinous as it actually is. So really good writing and a really good story that I definitely recommend that you seek out. I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for more Cormac McCarthy books in the near future. If you read this before, or you simply want to comment on something I said here, again, I welcome you to comment below so we can have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this author and this book if they do not already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and blood-ridden travels. Farewell.